Hello, welcome back to my channel. I have just turned 30 years old, and in honor of my 30th birthday, I thought what better thing to do, what better way to celebrate than to talk to you about the books that I feel have really changed my life. Now, I wasn't intending initially to sit down and tell you about these life-changing books. Initially, I was going to just walk you through my 30 best romances of all time, my favorites of all time, and this does share some overlap. There will be some overlap between those two things, but I thought it would be more fun to reflect on how books have changed my life, how my tastes have changed over time, and to kind of show you where my love for reading kind of started in the olden days back in, I think, around like 2007, 2008 when I was in middle school. So we're gonna be walking through books from there all the way up until the present day. And I have to say, in making my notes for this video, it just made me so thankful that I have a place here on the internet where I can just unabashedly talk about my love for books, and that there are people here who want to watch and listen. And to that I say thank you. It really feels like a full circle moment for me. But before I get too sappy and before I get into it, let me first tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. So I've been thinking lately about developing a new hobby. For so long, YouTube and reading was like my sole hobby when I had a full-time job, but now that reading and YouTube are my full-time job, I have been craving a hobby that is just for me, something that I can really get my hands into, that can take me out of my mind and into my body, if you will. And Skillshare is really perfect for that. Any new craft, any new skill that I am desperate to learn, Skillshare has lessons for me. So lately I have been watching videos on embroidery and on sewing to really try to understand them better and figure out which is better for me, especially as I head into the new year. I want to like head into the new year really confident about whatever crafting pursuit that I'm going into. And why Skillshare, you might ask? Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives, with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. Skillshare can help you take your career, your hobbies, your passions, or side hustles to the next level. I cannot list how many ways Skillshare has helped me in the last couple of years. I've taken so many different classes on productivity, on entrepreneurship, on photography, and these are skills that have really helped me level up my YouTube business and be a full-time job. And they have so much more, you know, from film to animation to design, whether you're looking to improve a skill or learn something new. The embroidery class that I'm taking right now with Danielle Clow has been such a godsend. Not only does she teach you the details on how to stitch, but she also tells you like what materials you're going to need ahead of time. And I really appreciated that, because whenever I was trying to navigate online and try to figure out what I actually needed to get into this hobby, it was kind of hard. And I feel like I was getting different information from different people, but Danielle makes it super simple in her lessons. I love that everything is very bite-sized so I can watch at my own pace. And with fall and full swing, I'm really leaning into slowing down, focusing on cozy hobbies, self-improvement, and gratitude. And I honestly think that investing in a creative pursuit is a really good way to practice gratitude. So if you'd like to join me and feel your own joy, now is the perfect time. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this portion of today's video. Now let's get into it, shall we? Let's talk about the books that have changed my life. First up, Eclipse by Stephanie Meyer. Now, what can be said about this series that has not already been said? These books almost single-handedly turned a generation of girls into readers, and while I can't say that my foray into reading and my love of books really came from Twilight, books, of course, had a huge impact on the trajectory of my life. I remember being introduced to the series by one of my teachers, I believe in like 7th or 8th grade, and she had her own like classroom library where she had the hardbacks, I think, of like the first 3 books that were out. I fell in love. She encouraged me to read them. She was like, I think you're gonna really enjoy these. And I was in this like introductory class at my school. It was like the first year that they ever offered it. It was called Adolescent Literature, and all that we did in that class was read books. And so I remember, shout out to Miss Hawk, grabbing a book from her shelves and reading it and falling just head over heels for this romantic story, and especially Eclipse. Eclipse is a book that I read so many times, specifically the makeout scene. Did I read that unabashedly over and over again? Did I like really put in the work reading that scene over and over again in that class? I sure did. No shame. It's too young to know shame, really. Times were really simpler back then, and all I remember thinking to myself was, why don't they just do it already? Adult me realizes the Mormon allegory, and young adult me a few years later realized that there are some books that do actually have sex on the pages, which we'll get to a little bit later on. But in truth, this book was special to me beyond just the makeout scene, beyond just, I guess, discovering what I'm into for the first time. Was I really into that? I mean, Edward's not what I'm into now, let me tell you that much. But beyond that, the scene where Jacob finds out that Edward is going to marry Bella when he has found out that Edward has proposed to Bella, I remember thinking that that was one of the most heartbreaking scenes that I had ever read in a book, and I, for some reason, really just related to Jacob's anguish. Why? I don't know. I had never been in a relationship. No one even liked me back in middle school. It was the first hints, I think, of me really starting to understand what I liked in romance, right? Like this pining, this angst, this longing that Jacob felt for Bella, while misplaced and while he obviously wasn't going to be the choice, was something that I personally really enjoyed and didn't know how to put words to. And for that, This book was life-changing. Moving on to Twilight's arguably cooler and much harder to adapt, apparently, little sister, Vampire Academy. If you're unfamiliar, this one is about a Dhampir, which is kind of like a half vampire, half human, who ends up protecting vampire kind. And there are like good vampires and bad vampires, and obviously the Dhampirs protect the good vampires. And we've got Rose, who is a Dhampir, and we have Lissa, who is her best friend, who is a vampire. At the start of the story, these two have run away from their boarding school and are now returned back to this boarding school. And they have to face, you know, typical teen drama where there's mean girls and bullies. They also have to fight supernatural forces who are out to get them. Now, what did this book teach me, you might ask? First of all, vampires aren't a fucking phase for me. I really like them. Now, obviously, there are going to be direct ties to Twilight. Like, so much of publishing is tied to whatever is popular at a given time. I mean, we can look at the Hunger Games and all of the dystopian books that came from there. So it's obviously no surprise that I ended up picking up Vampire Academy and loving it. But vampires are just special to me, right? They are inherently sexy. And as I'm pretty afraid of dying, the concept of immortality was, and still is, very appealing to me as a reader. But aside from that, this series was one of the first to show me what a badass heroine looks like. Now, I think Bella Swan gets a lot of hate that she doesn't necessarily deserve. She is a fantastic self-insert character, if I do say so myself. But Rose was a teenage girl, and she didn't let people push her around, which was something that I found a lot of strength in. I am an eldest sister. I am quite mouthy, so reading a character like this felt more akin to how I wanted to carry myself in the world. Something about the forbidden aspect, too, of the relationship in this story really appealed to me as well. I really liked that hot for teacher plotline. Now, as an adult, not really into that. I have to say, I think even for me back then, it was really less about the actual dynamic at play there with Rose and what's his name? Dimitri. Was the tangible forbidden aspect. I think that was something that was missing for me from Twilight. I couldn't fully understand why Edward was forbidden to Bella. Like, sure, I guess he could kill her, but like that didn't feel tangible enough for me. Like, he's her teacher in Vampire Academy. That felt tangible, right? Tangibly forbidden. And that appealed. But yeah, this book, it taught me a lot about my reading tastes. Moving on to a book that has gone triple platinum in my house. The book that I have read more than any other on planet Earth. I don't know if I should be proud of that fact or ashamed. Anyway, City of Bones is actually the book that I've read more than any other book ever, which is surprising, right? You would assume it would be something like Twilight, but it is in fact City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. And I know what you're thinking, Chandler, the brother-loving book? City of Bones was my introduction into the world of paranormal and urban fantasy romances. It follows a girl who doesn't know she's part of a race of these angelic, half-human beings who end up fighting demonic creatures, and she finds this out because she sees what she believes to be a human boy being murdered in a club. Obviously he's a demon, obviously the people hunting him are shadow hunters, and obviously Clary is going to find out that there's not just demons and angel people, there's also vampires and werewolves and fae and things that she didn't even know existed. I have to say, the world that Cassandra Clare overlays over top of New York is so immersive, and it was one that I just wanted to stay in. I think that's probably why I reread this book so often. I had read high fantasy stories before, I had read, you know, typical like princess and like fae stories, but I had never read something like this that was, again, that typical like urban fantasy romance thing, and I adored it. And it wasn't just that. Also the fact that Jace, the hero in this book, or one of the main male characters in this book, was one of the most interesting male main characters that I had read up until this point, because Jace, he's not only a little bit damaged, which is something that you're going to see time and time again on this list, I hate to say, he's also fucking funny. And I might seem like a small thing, but from about 2000 to about 2015, it was the trenches for sure for heroes, whether it was YA or adult novels. The heroes were so similar. They had this like toxic sort of controlling thing, or a slightly more covert kind of controlling, like think Edward, you know, like you need my protection, Bella. And Jace was different. And not only that, but teenage me was truly gagged at the yearning here. There is a love triangle because hello, it's 2007. Of course there was. I have to say, with my reread of the series, the multiple rereads I did, I kind of always flip-flopped between who I wanted Clary to be with, her best friend Simon, or the broody, sexy, kind of funny guy Jace. I just didn't know who I wanted her to end up with. And I also just like how heartbreakingly fucked up the end of this book was. Is it weird? Yeah, objectively very fucking weird. But I did really appreciate that this, again, was a tangible, forbidden romance. And as we find out later, it wasn't actually that forbidden, but I was just a glutton for punishment back in the day, I guess. I really liked that yearning, I really liked the pining, and it changed my life. How many times am I going to say that in this video? Well, someone start a count. Next up, we have The Awakening, and I'm not talking about the Zodiac Academy series. I'm talking about the somewhat underrated second book in the Darkest Powers series by Kelly Armstrong. In the second book, things really start to heat up. You've got a group of teens on the run from an evil organization that has genetically modified them to have like weird powers, and our heroine specifically is a necromancer, and she is amongst other teens. We've got a werewolf, we've got a sorcerer, we've got, what else? A witch? Crazy shit is afoot. And could I tell tell you the heroine's name here? No, I couldn't. But what I can tell you is what this book made me feel tangibly, and that would be angst and motherfucking tension. This book introduced me to the idea of the unlikely hero. And how often do we get those in romance? Not very often. See, up until this point, I had read a lot of love triangle romances, but all of those love triangles had a very particular leg that was going to be the leg. You know, it's not really a love triangle if one of the legs is like this big, like no chance, and one of them is really, really, really big. There's no euphemism there. I don't even know what I'm trying to do here with this metaphor, but obviously Edward was going to win. Obviously Peeta was going to win. Like, there was no question there. And in this book, the heroine actually chooses the less likely candidate. The big, stoic, not very talkative werewolf who is described as also not very handsome. But the way that the author wrote him, you just wanted these two to get together and you really wanted to know more about him. You wanted to peel back his layers. You wanted him to smooch the heroine, honestly. So again, this one introduced me to the unlikely choice and the outlier, and that maybe I didn't want to be with the macho, smooth-talking alpha. Maybe I wanted someone a little bit different. All right, remember when I was talking about Eclipse and I was talking about how I just wanted them to bang already? That led me down a path of discovery. After I read the Twilight series, especially as I was like craving Breaking Dawn, it hadn't even come out yet, I was on the hunt for a vampire romance series that had a little bit more explicit content. And I'm honestly not even sure if that was very specifically what I was looking for, but I found it. I found it in the Black Dagger Brotherhood series by J.R. Ward. I was immediately in love with the series because of how deep the lore and the world building went, especially compared to something like Twilight, which seemed a little superficial and only had slight changes on kind of the vampirism here. There was this gang of 2000s rap music loving, leather clad dude bro vampires. They got me hook, line, and sinker, okay? So narrowing it down to one book in the series was pretty hard because there are 20 plus books, but honestly, no, it actually wasn't very hard. I think everybody who's read the series knows that the third book, Lover Awakened, is absolutely the best in the whole series because you've got this hero who is described in the first two books as being kind of irredeemable. No remorse for any of his actions, very violent, and all of the guys in the series are supposed to be violent, but he is just like next level violent. Anyway, the hero in this book, his name is Sadist, which is crazy, but he was essentially sex trafficked. He was kept by an evil woman, so in his actual romance in his book, he learns how to heal from a lot of the sexual and psychological damage that he has from what happened to him, and it's not pretty. He often walks away from encounters, and he often doesn't know how to articulate his feelings in a way that is productive, but as the book carries on, he does get the help he needs, he does heal from these things, and he is able to have a successful romantic relationship. And I think what appealed to me most about this book was something that I was reflecting on recently. I always like to boil things down to I just like damaged heroes, but I think it really goes beyond that. I think what this book represented to me in the 2000s when I was reading it was the idea of a guy who can be vulnerable, because again, most of the guys in this series and most of the guys in the books I was reading in general are supposed to be masculine, they're supposed to be alpha, they can't show their feelings, they're not allowed to be soft, but Sadist in this book was really given the agency to be able to talk about his feelings, to put up boundaries, to heal from his trauma. That was something that I really appreciated. He is genuinely soft and gentle with his heroine, and it was something, again, that I really hadn't seen in romances before. It was all these like macho take charge guys, and I'm not saying that wasn't at all present in this book because, I mean, of course it kind of was, but it just felt like such a departure from anything I had ever read. It was a really life-changing book to me. It still is. I have it on my desk right behind me here because I was revisiting passages as I was typing up the notes for this video. So again, I have such a soft spot for this book. I love a damaged hero trope in general, but this really gave me a peek into what I thought romance could be. Now, rounding out my pre-college era, we have Daughter of Silken Bone by Laini Taylor. I distinctly remember reading this one on the way to one of my college visits, and it was the college I ended up attending for my freshman year, and I was just instantly enamored with this writing. I had never read anything like it, and to this day, I really have not read anything like it since. If you've ever read anything by Laini Taylor, you know how inventive and how deep her worlds go. I really, again, I cannot draw any comparisons because there just are none to be made. This one has angels at war with Chimera, and the romance at its center is this sort of star-crossed lovers concept. And that was never something that really connected with me personally. I never watched Titanic until this year, actually, and I really didn't enjoy Romeo and Juliet. I didn't really understand the vibes there, but something about this book really got me to care about the star-crossed lovers trope, and every once in a while I'll find one just as good as this one, and it just reminds me of this book. Now, no list like this would be complete, in my humble opinion, without a Sarah J. Maas book. Look, love her or hate her, the Court of Thorns and Roses series got a lot of people back into reading, and I also think it kind of acts as a compass for readers to kind of point point them in the direction that they will go from here. Are you looking for a book that is more focused on the fantasy? Are you looking for even more romantasy? Are you kind of into the romantic relationship here, but you didn't really care about the fantasy? The Court of Mist and Fury I read for the first time back in college in 2016. I'd make a joke about being old, but this video is literally 30 books that changed my life because I'm turning 30, so I think we already know at this point that I'm old. There was definitely a lull in my reading in college. I don't know about y'all, but I didn't really have a whole lot of time to read fiction. I was reading a bunch of shit for classes, and I did read a lot over the summers, but it wasn't, again, this like compulsive, can't put books down kind of thing until I read the first 2 ACOTAR books in my second semester, I believe, of my senior year of college. It was right before the 3rd book came out, and I was just reminded of my love for YA fantasy series, and I love that this one was very similar to a lot of the ones that I had read. Maybe not totally similar, but I really liked that there were more adult themes present here. And I think the whole like Rhysand reveal really fucked me up because it hadn't really been spoiled yet. Like the book series hadn't gotten majorly popular. I wasn't in like online bookish spaces to really know what the reveal was going to be, so it really hit me hard. I really loved these books, and this book in particular, it didn't really, I would say, introduce me to new tropes or new concepts, but it did help me get back into reading, and I think it's important to put it on this list for that reason. I have reread it a few times since, and I still love it, honestly, no shame. Now, another book that I still love and still I think holds up to this day is The Score by Elle Kennedy. This was one of the first new adult romances that I ever read, and it was maybe more eye-opening for me than Akamath, because again, I had read YA fantasy before, but up until reading The Score, I had really not read very many, if any, books set in college with characters that I could relate to. Most of the romances I was reading were like vampire romances with people in their like 20s or 30s, experiencing things that I just hadn't gone through yet, you know, like changing careers or like trying to decide who I was going to marry. Like those things seemed a little bit far-fetched, right? Like a little bit way too far in the future for me. And of course, you don't have to relate to every character that you read, but it is really cool when you can relate to characters, especially when they're your own age or going through things that maybe you would like to be able to go through. I mean, the heroine in this book is dating like a hot college hockey player. Like what isn't hot about that? What isn't appealing about that? And I feel like the emotions felt more real to me. Not that emotions in fantasy books can't feel real, but like, I don't know what it's like to be Farah out in the woods, like hunting for her family, you know? But I can relate to like heartbreak to an extent, or at least I could whenever I read this book. Seeing a regular girl date a hot athlete felt more relatable to me, even if I am technically married to a band cake. So love this book for that reason. Moving on to the first slow word romance I ever really got my toes or my fingers into. Why would my toes be in the book? I think y'all know what I mean, right? Dipping my toes into the waters of Colty by Mariana Zapata. This book is about a girl in her 20s who is a professional soccer player, and she ends up dating the coach of her professional soccer team, and he's kind of an asshole, and it was just such a delicious setup for me. I love a good sports romance. That's something that tends to be pervasive in the books that tend to have an impact on me, but execution of this was just so perfect. I feel like this was maybe one of the first times that I got to see a character too really through their own eyes. And like I'd read first person POVs probably up until this point, but something about the way that Mariana Zapata writes her characters, whether you love them or hate them, they tend to be a little immature. They really feel like real people, right? They're really telling you all about their family and how it plays into their romances and their insecurities, and Mariana Zapata's books and her characters are just really about them. It was something that was really refreshing and something that I didn't see when I read books like Black Dagger or Brotherhood. So this book taught me about slow burn. It also really taught me about what could be in terms of characterization. Now, some books defy explanation as to their popularity and also as to why I would put them on this list. This book with a corn dog paw print cover might be probably the best example of that. I'm honestly not really sure what put Foxhole Court by Nora Sakovic on my radar, but here it is. It is best described as a made-up sport mafia story with the barest hint of romance. Really gives like 2014 Tumblr vibes. I picked this up when I was really deep into my scam days, when I was trying to like conjure up that same level of like yearning and pining that I felt back when I was in middle school. This book really did deliver for that. I read all 3 of these on a vacation. I want to say like a Mexico vacation. Like I was on a beach reading this shit, and I could not stop thinking about them even after I was finished. Now I'm not actually sure what all these books taught me, but I think they were some of the first queer books that I had ever really read beyond like Aristotle and Dante. And I think what I also gained from these is that not every book has to be serious. Not every book has to be the best written. Books are about evoking feelings, and this book evoked a lot of feelings in me, and that was something that I really liked, right? Just showed me again like the inherent eroticism of sports and competition. It reiterated my fangirly shippiness again that I was trying to like reactivate, and it showed me that despite my best efforts, I do still love a fucked up damaged hero. So moving right along. The last book before we leave my college era and enter into the booktube era. This is a book that I am simultaneously not proud of, but also spoke to parts of me that I feel like really needed to be seen. And Punk 57 is the name of that book. It is a new adult bully romance set in high school. I think it was the first one that I had ever read, my first ever bully romance. I tried to recreate that magic many times by picking up other ones, and they never really lived up to the hype for me. Is this book unproblematic? No. I mean, it is a bully romance, but did the 2000s emo punk scene vibes really fuck me up? Absolutely. Because, and not to get too introspective here, all young me wanted was a guy to notice me. You know, an adult me is kind of like, girl, we don't do things for men. But back in the day, all I really wanted was someone to have a secret crush on me. That's really what I wanted. I was not very cute. I was not very popular. I didn't have a ton of friends. But the idea of a guy like secretly holding a flame for me, that was so appealing. And this book kind of spoke to that, right? Because this book evoked the vibe of the time period that I was in middle school. Not that this book is set in middle school. The book is about a girl who is pen pals with someone. They've been pen pals for many, many years. And she meets this person in real life, neither knowing who the other person is. And they do not like the person that they meet in real life, but they love the person that they are pen pals with. And so they have to kind of eventually reconcile those two things as they figure out who that person is in real life. I don't know how to put into words what about that affected me. Something about getting to know someone in a different context, getting to be vulnerable in a different context really appealed. And honestly, this whole book really just felt like I was living out a dream, as silly as it might sound if you've read it, but it really spoke to me. And even when I reread it now, knowing its flaws, I still can't help but smile. I still can't help but just reminisce on a different time in my life. So let's move on now to the booktube era. And it makes sense, I would say, that more of the books that have impacted me are kind of in this portion of my life. I started my channel in 2018, which feels like yesterday, but it also feels like a completely different time. Things were very different at that time. Most of what was really popular was young adult books. Most people who are really big in this space were talking about young adult books. That's not to say that nobody ever talked about adult books, but for the most part, the things that were popular were like the new upcoming YA titles. And so that is why I ended up picking up The Cruel Prince. I had actually had some experience with Holly Black. I really loved Tithe, Ironside, and Valiant, which are like her first Fae books. I read those back in middle school. So it was kind of cool getting to revisit an author who I did have experience with and did really like. And it also just, I guess, spoke to where I was at in my reading kind of career at that point. I wanted to see what was hot. I wanted to see what was popular, even if I felt like I was beyond young adult. And this book taught me that there is no such thing, I guess, as being beyond young adult. There is no such thing as books being for like certain readers. I mean, sure, authors can write to a certain readership, but you never know who's going to be impacted by your book and like who is going to love it the most. And beyond that, I really loved this book because this is one of the best examples of enemies to lovers, whether or not you like it or not. Holly Black knows how to write a good enemies to lovers story, and I don't feel like I've read very many since that really reach that same level of hatred, like that same level of enemies in the enemies to lovers. And yeah, this book impacted me because it was a fantastic book. I absolutely ate it up at the time. I distinctly remember where I was when I read it, and I just remember the time in my life when I read it as well. I remember getting my second book, I think it was The Wicked King, signed by Holly Black at a book signing, one of the only ones I've ever been to, and this was just like the beginnings of my booktube career, and this book I do think in some ways changed my life. Another book, a book that was a new genre to me, and a book genre that I discovered literally through booktube, and that would be historical romance. So we're talking about The Governess Game by Tessa Dare. I had read a couple of historical romances before picking up this one. This is really the time period that I started reading historical romance. I want to say it was like 2018, 2019. It's crazy to me that I had never picked one up then, because I had read a ton of different genres in romance, dark romance, chick lit, new adult romance, rom-coms, you know, like everything. I feel like I had read everything up until that point, but never historicals. And The Governess Game was really the first one that I fell for hook, line, and sinker. Is about a single woman who becomes like the teacher, governess, whatever, to two young twisted girls who are under the care of their uncle. He is not sure how to handle them. He's also a bit of a rake himself, and he ends up falling for this governess. I loved it because it introduced me to new tropes. You've got the formed rake and the wallflower kind of trope, and then from there it just really, I guess, awakened a desire in me to read a more historical romance. I loved the speech, I loved the setting, I loved the romance. It was just so much fun, you know. It really opened up genre doors for me. So for that reason, this book did change my life. In spot number 14, we have The Bride Test by Helen Huang. This is a book that is special to me for reasons that I can't fully articulate, but I'll do my best to try. I had read books before that had characters where identity was a part of it, but I don't think I had read very many romances where identity was so integral to the characters. Like, obviously I had read romances with non-white characters before, but I had never read a romance up until this point where identity was so integral to how the characters related to each other and how it impacted the romance. We have a heroine who is from Vietnam and who is trying to make a better life for her daughter when she comes over and has an arranged marriage with an autistic man. Both of their identities were so integral to this romance, and I felt so seen reading this romance, even though I couldn't necessarily relate to their identities, if that makes sense. This book, so beautiful, it is so special, and it also kind of introduced me to this idea of miscommunication as a trope. I'd read it before, but I couldn't really articulate what about it I liked, and in this book I thought it was particularly well done. I think it is an excellent trope, and it's a realistic one because so many people have a hard time communicating in their romantic relationships, so absolutely adore this book. It has such a special place in my heart. It's also one of the first books that I cried reading, so hats off to Helen Wong. This is an all-time favorite for me, but especially a book that has changed my life. Saying that The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren taught me something feels silly to say out loud. It felt silly to type when I was typing up my notes. Listen, this book didn't teach me any new tropes, it didn't reinvent the wheel in any way, but it did remind me not to take life too seriously. It's never my intention to be intentionally contrary. But because of my taste in books, I know that I come off as never liking what is popular, never being pleased by anything. So when this book came out in 2019 and I was able to enjoy it, I was able to like something that was popular, it actually meant a lot to me because I was kind of gaslighting myself into believing that I was just intentionally contrary and that I was someone who never liked anything. And this book, you know what, taught me that books don't have to be serious for them to be enjoyed, right? 2020 was a hard year for all of us. And for me, it was especially hard because I was having a really challenging time finding books that I connected with. I was really in the throes of my Kindle Unlimited discovery days, and I'm not saying things were bleak 3 years ago, but there were definitely slimmer pickings when it came to books that I really connected with. So when I picked up Dear Ava for the first time, I really wasn't expecting much, but this book showed me the power of a scene. Now, to be clear, at the time, I really did enjoy the story as a whole. It's about a heroine who was unfortunately sexually assaulted, and she doesn't know who the perpetrator of this crime was. So as she's falling in love with the hero of the book, they are kind of trying to solve this mystery together. But what really stood out to me in this book is not those really hard-hitting topics, but it is one particular scene. Just one scene that I ended up buying this book for so I could go back and reread the scene anytime I wanted. And am I going to tell you what the scene is? No, I'm not, but it does involve some of the best male self-loathing that I've ever read in a book up until this point. And while a lot of my admiration for damaged heroes in the past was based on the vulnerability that they were able to show, I have to admit that I do just like a good damaged hero who doesn't think that they are good enough for the heroine. Angst makes the world go round, and I am not apologizing for it. I have always known that friends to lovers, for me, is the ultimate trope. It is far beyond enemies to lovers in what it can do for me. But one of my favorite representations of that is a book that I don't think gets enough love, and it is the only book that I've ever loved by Miss Emily Henry, and that is People We Meet on Vacation. I don't feel like I really need to tell you what this book is about, and I can't tell you how many times I've told the internet what this book is about, but it is two best friends who end up admitting their feelings for each other after many years of not doing that. They go on trips together every summer. After a few years of doing this, they have a falling out. They don't go for a couple of years. The heroine calls up the hero and is like, hey, I know we haven't talked in a while, but can we go on one last trip together? So they do that. We get to see that trip play out, and we also get to see in the past as they were developing romantic feelings for each other. And was it a fucking delight? It sure was. I like messy characters, okay? I like miscommunicators. I love people who just can't bare their souls because it would be too treacherous and too hard and too potentially detrimental to their friendship. 2020 was a pretty good year for romance for me. It was just a really nice time to indulge in something popular and to not be a hater once again, which I really liked. It was a good year for my reading. Another hot bombshell to enter the 2021 romance book villa is Actor Age Eve Brown. Now, this book was and is so special to me because this book really made me feel seen, and it also showed me that unconventional and honest can be very, very sexy. This book is about our main character Eve, who can't really hold down a job because she loses interest in things super quick. She's also autistic. And then there is Jacob, who is also autistic, who owns a bed and breakfast, and the neurodivergence of both Eve and Jacob is very, very different. They kind of butt heads because he's very particular, she's very, go with the flow, kind of flighty, flaky. Anyway, Eve gets a job working at the bed and breakfast and again clashes with Jacob's staid personality. I just loved the neurodivergence rep in this book because it felt real and very accurate, and I'm so used to seeing caricatures. It is so infuriating. I literally just read a book 2 days ago where it was a character of an autistic person, and it was really frustrating to read, and that wasn't the case here. And also, what was the case here, candid talk in the bedroom. And it's not that I've never read a romance to this point that had candid talk, but the way that sex is talked about in this book, and sexual desire in specific, was so refreshing. Often, you know, in romances, you'll have characters say like, oh, I like that or whatever, but you don't have people telling you exactly what they like to do to themselves and how you should do it to them. And in this book, you have that. I didn't think that that would be sexy, but the way that it was executed was sexy, and it showed me honest communication is sexy, and it can make things so much more hot and so much more titillating. I, of course, love a good miscommunication trope, which I've said a couple of times already, but this showed me how great communication can be as well. Prior to the publication of Part of Your World, I hated two things: Abby Jimenez books and chick lit. But Part of Your World changed both of those things for me. This book is an age gap romance between a doctor getting out of an abusive relationship and her burgeoning relationship with a younger guy who runs, I want to say, a B&B. I feel like we're noticing a theme here. This book was really heavy on the non-romantic components, and normally that is something that I dislike. I don't like when the focus veers too much from the romance and is too focused on other aspects of the story. I want the character development to an extent, but again, I get suspicious when we're not having enough romantic relationship moments between the two characters. This book showed me how powerful personal development is for romance. Alexis, the heroine of the story, has such a powerful character arc, and the way that it impacted the way she experienced love was so important to me. I also don't think it can be understated how much I was indifferent to or actively hating Abby Jimenez's first 3 books, and now that feels crazy to say because I've had 3 straight 5-star romances from her, but this book taught me that you can't overlook an author even if you've disliked a few of their books. There is still a chance that you might have a banger from them one day, and they might continue to put out bangers after that. So give authors second chances for sure, third chances, even fourth chances. Moving on to a book that I think continues to define my taste and continues to be exemplary of my taste, A Photo Finish by Elsie Silver. We work our way through the list, and through time, my tastes are firming up as we see things repeat themselves, themes, topics, tropes, etc. And Photo Finish has all the things I love plus horses. This one is about Violet, who had, I want to say, an OnlyFans, or she was doing some sort of OnlyFans type job, and she developed a really special connection with a guy that she was chatting with. He would like ask for special videos, but she really felt a connection with him until one day they just kind of stopped talking, and then flash forward like a year or two maybe, she meets this guy in real life. He is a grumpy disabled veteran. Different context, you know what I mean? We've got the semi-pen pal situation. I've got a damaged hero. I'm a simple girl, right? Like one Goodreads reviewer said about this book, this one was emotional and horny, and I think that just about sums up my taste in books. And to really drive that point home, I had to include Waking Olivia, which is horny and emotional, but make it new adult. Also add in age gap and sports romance, which again are two things that I do tend to enjoy, with a melancholy yet funny vibe. Now, Waking Olivia is one of those books that I feel like you either get it or you don't, and the people who get this book, like me and them, besties, you know what I mean? Like, this is the true test of if we have the same taste in books, for sure. Just a very specific way that this book is written. It is melodramatic and depressing and a little melancholy, and also funny. There are moments of levity in this book. There are moments that make me laugh. This and Deal with the Devil, which is another book that I read around this time from the same author. And I think what was special about this one to me is that it showed me that these two things can coexist, because I'd never really read a book like this. I'd read the over-the-top melodramatic Colleen Hoover kind of stuff. I had read, the rom-com-y Unhoneymooners kind of things, but I'd never read things that combined the two. And as someone who wants to write my own book one day, I really liked this idea of being able to write a book that is melancholy that also has funny moments, because my instinct, the thing that I would love to write, is this like deep angsty story. When I sit down to write, a bitch writes jokes. To see that these two things could coexist had an impact on me, not only as a reader, but as someone who wants to write my own book one day. Have I mentioned that I like fanfic vibes and pen pals? Because when I initially read The Love Hypothesis back when it was in its heyday, I really enjoyed it, but I didn't fully get it. I didn't fully understand the hype, which is weird, as that one is, let's be honest, the same book, not even in a different font, but like italicized when compared to Love on the Brain. I think the inclusion of the secret DMs portion of this one is what really sold it to me and got me to really buy into this idea of republished fanfiction. So this one is about a NASA girly named B and her nemesis Levi, who she thinks is trying to sabotage her program, her project, but isn't. In fact, he's trying to help her, and he's also obsessed with her and has been for years. She runs a feminist Twitter account, and he also runs a Twitter account, and they are best friends and DM each other like daily. They don't know who the other person is in real life. I love a good knowing each other in a different context romance. I mean, that's a repeating theme we're seeing here, right? It's just one of the first books that I had read in a really long time that truly made me giggle and kick my feet. And it was bringing me back to middle school in that way, again, with the fanfiction vibes, but also with the giddy feeling that I got every time I picked up this book. And as I was writing my notes for this book, I have to say, I was tempted to pick it up again. And literally when I hit record on this, I will be picking this one up again. So I think that tells you all you need to know on how this book impacted me. Moving on to the only good thing that Burger King has done besides chicken fries, and that would be writing the Love Light Farm series. I could use this opportunity to tell you that this is the first Christmas romance that I have ever loved, which is in fact true. But what this book actually taught me about is sex. Not literally, but in the sense that you can achieve truly achingly sexy scenes without having to call it a dong on page. And that might seem like sort of a duh thing, but over the course of my life, how I have felt about sex in books has actually changed. When I was younger, I wanted more of it. When I was older, I wanted even more of it, and I was really annoyed when books weren't super detailed and graphic in their depictions. I wanted more than one sex scene in a book. Now that I am really older, I feel like the tides have turned a little bit. I really do not crave sex scenes in books because there are too many. Frankly, I think that one, maybe two well-placed sex scenes at the end of the book is so much more pleasing and delightful to me than like 6 sex scenes and no communication between characters in a book. Sex is awesome, right? I like watching characters connect in that way on page. I think that it is important to relationships sometimes, for some relationships. You know, conversations are always going to be more important to me. And in Love Light Farms, it's, you know, this amazing Gilmore Girls small town setting with a friends to lovers romance. It's really sweet. And there's a sex scene in this book, but it is just written differently. I'd never seen a sex scene written like this. There are not a ton of euphemisms used. There is not anatomical language used, but you get the gist of what's happening, like enough to feel satisfied after reading the scene. And I really liked that. I know that might be a small thing, maybe not a reason to include a book on a list, but it actually did impact me quite a lot, and I quite enjoyed it. So quite simply, Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan is the first marriage in trouble / second chance romance that I actually really loved and appreciated. Kennedy Ryan is one of my all-time favorite authors, and I've read some really incredible books by her, but the Skyland series is what cemented her as a favorite for me. The women in these books are so strong, and they grow so much, and they are so inspiring to me. And this one in particular is just further proof that I am leaning more into the women's fiction side of things and less on the kind of viral, smutty stuff. So this book's about Yasmin and Josiah. They have gone through a divorce, and a couple of years later, they do end up coming back together after some of the events and after reflecting on what caused them to get a divorce in the first place. That almost never works for me. I have read other marriage in trouble books or books where characters are divorced and come back together, and they almost never work for me. But this one does such a masterful job. It is emotional, it is sexy, and I just want more romances like this. Now with number 25, 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston, the concept of whimsy has really been on my mind lately, right? For the past year, I have really been wanting to lean into books that are more fun, you know? I love angst and tension, and I'm not saying that's ever going to go away, but sometimes I need levity to kind of break things up, and 7-Year Slip definitely delivered that. It's about a book publicist who lives in her dead aunt's apartment, and this apartment has some magical abilities, and that ability is to bring whoever lives there back 7 years in the past, which I find kind of interesting. And in the past, of course, our heroine falls in love with someone, which makes the present a little bit confusing, right? Like, how she meant to find this man, and is this person still in love with her? Does this person have someone new? Are they married? It's confusing. It's a little bit of a mindfuck. Normally, my rational brain tells me that this concept doesn't make sense. I wouldn't enjoy this, that it's too stressful, honestly, the concept of it. But I was able to just like turn off my brain a little bit and enjoy the whimsy of the story. And sometimes that's really nice. And sometimes that is quite magical. Finding the right book at the right time is something that I think is incredibly underrated. And it is one of the most soul satisfying experiences that if you're not a reader, I don't think that you will ever understand. But reading The Right Move as I was navigating some really tough things in my life, especially infertility, this book made navigating those things a lot better. It is a romance between begrudging roomies, and you've got a pro basketball hero as the player, and it is just so romantic. Ryan is one of the best heroes that I've read in a really long time, and I felt such a special kinship with the heroine Indy. The epilogue end scene of this book too is one that I feel like is the ultimate fantasy. It is the ultimate dream. It is what I personally wish for at the time, and honestly still today. I needed that fantasy. Now number 27 is a book that has really shown me a new trend that I actually think that I'm enjoying in romance, and that would be the rise of a low stakes romance. So this one has 2 characters who both have limb differences, and they end up getting kind of surprise pregnant and trying to raise a baby together. Now, I normally hate surprise pregnancy books, but this book showed me that that isn't always the case, which really did surprise me. And also it showed me that if you can write the hell out of romance, I am pretty much on board with anything. And also that low stakes does not necessarily equal low tension, which I didn't really know before. Number 28 is On the Same Page by Haley Cass. At this stage in the game, I have read a few sapphic romances, not as many as I'd like, mind you, but definitely enough to know what I am personally looking for. But I have to say, despite like knowing what I'm looking for, I haven't really found one that is just perfect for me, that that is like the perfect 5-star, can't stop thinking about it romance until on the same page. This is a friends to lovers story with impeccable fanfic style miscommunication and hot sex. Just literally everything that I am looking for. And there's something that I don't want to spoil in this book that is incredibly unique to me. Not unique to me as a person, but it struck me as unique, I should say. Something that makes this book truly stand out, and that is the way that this book is told. So you get these scenes in the past where you see these two women become friends, and you come to understand how that friendship came to be. I feel like I'm saying the same thing, just in different ways. What I'm trying to get at is the way that these two became friends is something that I have never read before, and I don't want to spoil it for you. I feel like everybody needs to pick up this book, but it's a very unconventional start to a friendship, and the way that Gianna, one of our main characters, changes from college to present day was something that I could relate to. You know, potentially seeing yourself as like kind of a shitty person and potentially growing from that. I don't know. I really liked that. This book was genuinely life-changing. I cannot stop thinking about it. This is another one similar to Love on the Brain that I kind of just want to like pick up and read again. So if you haven't picked this one up, which I know a lot of y'all haven't, you really need to. Now, it's been a hot second since I have found a historical romance, something that really like takes me by surprise and does something new in the genre. And that's definitely a me problem, but I usually am picking up historical romances at this point for videos. It's not a subgenre that I like seek out a ton for myself, and I have to say the ones that I've read have been pretty disappointing lately. Same tropes over and over again, and romances that just ultimately aren't convincing. And I started realizing the reason that all of them were kind of running together for me is that they're all set in England, they're all Regency romances, they're all about white people, and they have the same recycled tropes, so it would stand to reason that they would all kind of run together at that point. So reading Indigo by Beverly Jenkins really showed me that I do still like historical romance. I was really questioning whether that was the case anymore. I am just really craving more historical romances with non-European settings and non-white main characters. This one is about Hester, who is a conductor on the Underground Railroad in Michigan, I want to say, and she ends up healing and helping this injured man who has been stealing enslaved people from the South and bringing them up north so they can, of course, be free. This book was so immersive, so high stakes, and so fucking romantic. I understand why this book is so popular, and when I said that I was like, you know, I found something fresh, this book was published in 96, so it like has been around, and there are more that I need to explore for sure. What I discovered from reading this book is that historical romances are more than just pretty dresses. They're more than just these Regency settings, and I think what I truly am coming to love about historical romance is books that teach me something, books that say something about the time period that they are in, besides just like the misogyny of white men in England, right? So this book was incredibly impactful, and it has one of the best, most romantic epilogues that I think I've ever read. So Indigo is a classic for a reason, and this book genuinely changed my life, and I'm so excited to find more historical romances going forward that are not just set in Regency England. And then the last one, this felt hard, right? Like the 30th book on the list, the last book that has had like the most impact on my life. It was hard narrowing it down. It was hard coming up with just one, but this one I think impacted me for a multitude of different reasons, and I think kind of makes things come full circle. So Left to Forever by Tara DeWitt is the last book that has had an impact on me, the last book that has changed my life. This is a second chance romance, similar to Before I Let Go, in that it is a second chance romance between people who are divorced. This is a story that is equal parts lighthearted and emotional. It is something that I aspire to in my own writing, and I have to say that that is what is most impactful about this story to me. It's not only that the story is truly amazing on its own merit, because it is that I was lucky enough to get to Sensitivity read this book, and there's something really special about seeing a book before it has all of its editing polish on it. It made me feel, again, not only honored, really special to be a part of it, but it also reiterated to me my desire to write my own book. This isn't some grand announcement. I've been talking about the fact that I want to write a book since about 2019, but reading this book kind of made me think that maybe I could do this. Like getting a peek behind the curtain made me feel like maybe I could actually do this. Not that I could write anything quite as good as this one, because this is truly a remarkable 6-star book, but it did make me feel like, you know what, maybe I get to live that dream. And that is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of November. These videos that you have been seeing this month have all been pre-recorded. I am taking the rest of this month to do some writing, which I am super excited to do. I want this 30th year of mine to be my most full circle yet, you know? Got corny at the beginning of this video, and I'm gonna get corny again here. I cannot stress enough how fucking crazy it is to me that I get to do this every day, that I get to wake up, read romance, and talk to you about them on the internet. Some of y'all might be rolling your eyes about the fact that all of the books that were featured on this list are romance, but when I really reflected and sat down and thought about the books that have had the biggest impact, the ones that really have are romance. Romance is so special to me as a genre, and the fact that 7th grade me was so obsessed with Twilight, I think she'd be pretty excited about the fact that this is my job. So thank you for letting it be my job. I really so appreciate every one of you who subscribe, who watch my videos, and who have have made my time here so special. I'm not going anywhere, but yeah, I'm feeling particularly sappy here on my 30th birthday. Thanks so much for watching this video. Let me know in the comments down below what books have impacted you the most. What books have had the biggest impact on your life? I would absolutely love to know. But I love y'all so much. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.